Hi, my name is Yasmin Turehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, personal development, and spirituality. Today's episode is with Payal Kadakia, the founder of Classpass, a monthly membership program that provides people of all fitness levels access to the best boutique fitness classes, gyms, and wellness experiences across the US and abroad. And since its launch in 2013, Classpass has facilitated almost 100 million reservations across 22,000 partner studios in over 20 countries. Payal has been listed as one of the Fast Company's 100 most creative people and was named to Fortune's 40 Under 40 list. And her book, LIFEPASS, Drop Your Limits, Rise to Your Potential, a groundbreaking approach to goal setting, debuts February 15th, 2022. So welcome to the show, Payal.
Thank you so much for having me, Yasmin.
So Payal, just to kick it off, can you tell our audience what Classpass is and why you created Classpass?
Yeah, so Classpass is a monthly fitness and wellness membership that lets you take different classes and wellness experiences, really honestly around the globe. I mean, when it started, it was just really for, a spin class, yoga class, but we've really kept pushing it into other categories. And, the reason I started the company is because when I was younger, I really fell in love with dance and, being, I guess someone who didn't always fit into where I was. I'm an Indian girl who kind of grew up in a town where no one looked like me. I sort of found this sanctuary in dance. And when I was younger, it sort of just became my lifeline of a place where I knew I could feel like myself, feel centered, feel confident. And I kind of hung on to it. And I know everyone else, kind of gets involved with activities and sort of fitness and stuff as they get older, whether it's like athletics or creative experiences. And we tend to lose those things, right? As we become adults, they sort of go into the back burner and we start focusing on what society wants us to do in terms of success. And so I realized I was that girl fighting to dance through my college years, professional life. And, I got to a point where later in my life, I just realized that, it was really hard to find classes and I wanted to build a tool and use technology to build something to help people, especially adults, still have this playful life to them and this way to experience, activities that are connected to their passions and their purpose.
And Payal, so what was the actual catalyst that really brought you to create this? Was there a specific event or was it kind of a gradual series of events that, catalyzed you to start this business?
So, I didn't think I was going to be an entrepreneur, and what's really interesting is I started Classpass 10 years ago. Okay. And this is a decade ago when sort of tech and entrepreneurship was definitely not a mainstream way of life in a way, or a career people were going after. So I could literally count every entrepreneur I knew on one hand. Right. And so this was definitely not something that I think I thought I was going to pursue. I actually went out to San Francisco and tried to meet new people. I was at my friend's birthday and I was hearing them talk about their apps and talk about their products. And I was like, you do this full time? It was just a different career path that I had never really thought of for myself, right? I had sort of thought of typical paths of going into I was in consulting at the time, but I just thought of the normal paths that everyone always told me to do. And so entrepreneurship just sounded really interesting. And I had to start with an idea, right? To be an entrepreneur, you need to have something you're going to start with. And I remember going around for the next 2 weeks and I gave myself 2 weeks to think of an idea after I left San Francisco, just to see if I could think of something in that time. And 36 hours later, I was training in ballet in New York City at the time. I decided to look for a new class. And in my hunt for that new class, I realized what a pain it was to really find a class at all on the internet at the time. And that's when I was like, let me use technology to really put all this in one place. And there were all these other businesses out there like OpenTable, ZocDoc, Seamless Web that were helping people kind of, do the online to offline model, which is really about getting offline experiences, right, through the internet. And I just thought about, what about doing this for classes? And there were so many people in the world who I knew needed these moments in their life, right, to be taught, to learn, to grow. and they were devoid of it. And I really wanted to build that. So that moment was really day one. And that was August of 2010.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I actually was like a beta user for Classpass. I think I was one of the first people in New York because I lived in New York at that time too for about 10
Okay.
years. Yeah.
I
So I
love
remember.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, we had so many iterations in the beginning, which we can talk about, but I wonder which one you were on, because we obviously
Yeah.
like kept iterating and changing, and that's obviously a part of the journey. But I'm curious which plan you were on.
It's interesting because I lived in New York, I think, until 2014. So I'd been on ClassPass then. And I think at that time it was just in New York, if I remember, and not in
Yeah.
San Francisco. And so it came to San Francisco, obviously, in 2014 and has grown, since then. But yeah, no, I remember just a lot more classes being added and a lot more time slots being added, and just really enjoyed the experience because I also like a smorgasbord of workout classes and wellness activities. So, but I want to double click on growing up Indian American. So I also grew up Iraqi American. And when I read your book, I was moved by that story and that kind of context that I think a lot of people don't really talk about, especially in entrepreneurship, right? There's this kind of, new, I wouldn't say new, but a sort of different type of pressure that comes from the cultural context of family. And it's something I think
Yeah.
a lot of first generation children of immigrants have to face. So I'm curious, like, how did your experience of growing up Indian American influence your journey?
I mean, it influenced me so much. I mean, I think, there are pros to it and there's cons to it in a different way. I mean, I just took all them and put it into my life. And in the book, I talk about it a lot. I think it's rare when people can say so much of their life is connected to their childhood, but for me, it definitely was. And, there were positive things like my parents, 100% emphasized education, right? And it was sort of the gold star, right? You had to get straight A's, you had to do well, get into a good college, go to get a good job after, sort of do everything and kind of check all the boxes. And we can talk a little bit about how I had to get off that at some point, but I will never ever regret or, in any way feel like that was the wrong thing to do at the time. Like it taught me these foundational skills, which, I talk about in the skills chapter of the book, which is about how do you really build something that's substantial that will help you sort of take the leap from, right? And so I'm so glad they did that. But obviously it was hard to kind of find my way out of that, right? And I did that as I got older, which we can go into. But I think the other big thing was that I didn't fit in, right? Like I never felt like I belonged. I mean, I luckily found an Indian community in a town nearby that was about, I would say, 15 minutes away from my house that had a lot of Indian people in it. And that's where we would celebrate cultural festivals. And that's where I had dance practice. And, there was other Indian girls who looked like me and I felt like myself and I felt whole, but I really had to split myself in two. I was like a high school or, I was a cheerleader basically in my hometown. And then at night I would go and dance at these festivals at this other town. And I really feel, one of the biggest things I learned, and I think over time, I think that started happening in college, when I stopped living two identities and becoming one, I started realizing the power in that. And then I think I had to keep that going through my life as I got older, because I didn't just have the Indian American pull in me. Like I've always had this analytical, creative pull to me too. Like I love math and science. And then at the same time, I'm this creative dancer and an artist. And I think I always feel like I didn't fit in one world or the other. And I really felt that I needed to find ways to be whole in both those identities the same way, even though it took me a really long time to be whole with my Indian American identity, I did find that way. And a lot of it, obviously for me, came through my vehicle of dance.
And yeah, I want to also double click on the dance part because you are the founder and artistic director of the Sal Dance Company, which I believe
Yes.
founded in 2009. So at the same time that you were creating ClassPass, you also founded this dance company. And that to me kind of blows my mind, the fact that you can do both. And perhaps even, finding, being a founder of this dance company was so influential and probably helping you move through ClassPass, right? So I'd love to hear how that played out? Because I think a lot of people in the business world assume that you have to be categorically focused, right? To be successful, like you have to put all your eggs in this one basket. But it seems like you are very diverse with your skill sets and interests and energy. So I'd love to hear more about how dance kind of influenced you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, SAW started for me as sort of my first like entrepreneurial endeavor. And I was only 3 years out of college at the time. So I was really young, right? Like I still didn't know how the whole world worked. I was sort of at this point, back to my earlier point, trying to find my own journey that wasn't this path that was laid out for me based on like everyone else's expectations and opinions. And this point in my life where I decided that, okay, I'm not going to go and like go to business school, right? Which is like what everyone else in my life that was like following the same trajectory was doing. I went and got a corporate job, and I decided to use my other hours, which like I finally had predictable hours, to dance and build SAW. And I think that was a really important step in my journey because it started helping me fight for my own dreams and fight for my own sort of purpose in my life. But more than that, I learned how to be a leader and learn how to get things done, right? Like I think to be an entrepreneur in your life, like you need to actually have the confidence in your execution ability. And like I'm one of those people now in my life, and I think everyone around me knows this. If I say yes, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it 150%, right? And if I say no, I'm not going to do it. And I think I like started realizing that when I do want to create something, whether it was like a small show with 100 people, and I always say like Classpass almost started for me with a small dance show with 100 people, because that was my first ever like endeavor that I did on my own in like the real world. And I was able to like sell it out and have people like give us a standing ovation. And it gave me so much confidence to say, that's it. I'm going to like write a bigger check and go rent out another theater for 30K. Right. And so and then when I ended up at a point where once again, I was living two identities, like, right. I was going to work being this analyst. And then at night I was this amazing performer and artist. And that was like my other, duality I had to deal with, which finally came together when I decided to start Classpass, which was amazing. But back to your other question, and honestly, like this one's been it's a hard one, I kept SAW going, and I'd had 2-3 years of success before I actually started Classpass with SAW. When I started Classpass, SAW was like this outlet for me, right? It was my why of even creating Classpass. And I knew I couldn't lose dance or I would lose the heart and soul of my why, right? And just like let it go into pieces. So I hung on to it as much as I could. Was it hard? Yes. Did I think people judged me? Yes. Did I care? No. And I think I got there because I knew my magic was always being a dancer, right? Like I think, and I talk about that so much in the book, like I'm probably a great entrepreneur, but I think in my heart, like my talent truly was always dance, right? And I just used that to then like channel me to give something more to the world. And I talk about that, like my calling in life is actually dance, right? It obviously turned into Classpass as a thread of it, but I was never going to lose this thing that gave me the fuel to everything I did. And, there were times I think, especially as like, I think Classpass got bigger and there was like more attention on the company and me. It was tough, like I felt that it was like a lot of pressure to have to like fit into this box of even being a CEO and all of this. And actually like, that's even when I decided in 2017 to no longer be CEO. And part of that was like, yeah, I don't want to live into this societal box of what you guys want me to be as a CEO. Like I am very multifaceted. And that's actually what made this company and made the magic. I'm not going to let that go.
Right. Yeah. And I want to hear more about that because I think in entrepreneurship, we often hear about successes, but we don't really hear about what happens behind the scenes and what sort of sacrifices you have to make to sort of show up in that capacity of, let's say, CEO. So I'm curious, like, what was some of like the hardest, challenges that you had to deal with, and how did you overcome them? Like, how were you able to kind of move through and be resilient and continue creating this successful company?
I think some of them were, I think that like when we had to make some pricing changes, which actually you probably know about, given you were like, you were using the product at around that time. And it was really hard, like I think as a leader, it was this moment for me where, it was like on one side, I was looking at our business and I'm like, oh my God, we have so much engagement. And I remember my CFO and I talked about this, and he'd be like, this is like a strange way to look at it, but most companies would dream about this. Like, we have people going to too many classes, right? In a way, like that was what was sort of hindering our business at the time. And we couldn't have predicted that. Like, I had fought for 3 years to get one person to class, right? And here we were on the other side with people like thriving in going to class and everyone wanting to try so many different classes, but it was breaking our business, right? And I think those moments were just really hard because you don't want to disappoint people, right? Like, the entire reason I built this company was to like help make fitness and activities accessible. And it was hard to hear when people were sad, right? And like people were angry. And I remember those days like really well, and they hurt, because you're like, like I'm trying to do something good in the world and I just got to keep moving forward. And what am I going to do? Let my company like fail and just disappear and then no one go to class? No way. Like, I'm not going to do that. Right. It was working through the constraint of what I was facing in the best way possible. And we were going, we were flying, right? Like, we had competitors in like every city. Like, it was like the epitome of like what happens to like fast, high growth, like tech startups at the time, right? Like, we were living it in the moment, and we were just trying to make the best decisions we could at the time, and I don't regret any of it, but like there were definitely days where like, I always remember this one day and I had two of my girlfriends come over and like, they were like, it was like one of the days we made a big change and I just didn't want to see anyone. And they were like, we have pizza, we're outside your door. And like, I wouldn't even open the door because I was like, I can't see anyone. And they were like trying to get the pizza like underneath the door, because they were like, you need to eat and like, you need to like figure it out. But like, there are days where you're just like, oh my God, how do I go on? Right.
And do you also feel like that you gave up like some of the kind of personal life in order to run the business? Because I think that's also something I've heard from a lot of entrepreneurs and founders. Like, how are you able to maybe, setting clear boundaries? Because you talk about this in your book.
Yes. Yes. This is like such an important topic. So, I think because I had always prioritized dance in my life, like since I was younger, and like the act of being a performer and dancer is just not easy. Like, it requires daily practice. It requires like rehearsal. It requires like a crazy amount of work and effort and dedication, And so I had kind of been built with that mantra, like since I was like 5 years old. Right. And so I knew how to prioritize my time and really be able to like use it to do the things I wanted. Right. So when I started building my company, like I just was very clear on my priorities of what I wanted. Does that mean like other people didn't or disagreed with it? Absolutely. And, I think one of the hardest things that I sort of had to go through, and I talk about this very openly in the book, was the expectation of needing to get married, right? And I was in my 20s, and, every friend I had was probably dating somebody or like getting engaged. And I missed weddings, I missed baby showers, like I missed bridal showers, like I didn't have time, right? And at the same time, like I wasn't also focused on dating, which like was something that my parents were concerned about, but it just wasn't a priority for me at the time, And I quickly learned that I had to do things on my own timeline, and that I had always actually succeeded when I had done things in my own timeline, right? And that they would happen accordingly. And what I had to actually just do to enjoy that process was actually set a boundary on everyone else, right? And really not let their thoughts convolute my own from doing what I really wanted at the time and doing it well. And so like one of the things, and I go into this in detail, is like my mom would call me every single day, obviously. And I love talking to my mom. She's been the biggest supporter and role model to me throughout my entire life. But, like in the back of her head, and I get it, like part of this is not their fault, right? And I think for all of us, I'm sure you felt the same way. Like this is because of where they came from, right? And like what they expect from the lives that they grew up in, that they project onto us. And it's all they know. And like my parents took the biggest risk of their life to come to America. So they're like, we already went through all the craziness. Like, why don't you have stability, right? And here I am trying to like throw that out the door and not be stable. And sometimes I'm like, well, you guys took a risk. Why'd you think that I wouldn't be like that? Right. Like personality wise, we're all the same. Right. But so when I started, really like thinking about it and talking to her about it, like there were days where we would talk about, she would bring up dating and I would say, hey mom, like I gotta go. I have a meeting, and I would just sort of politely with love hang up, because I just was like, I don't want to go down this path, you know, and I would avoid sometimes like family functions where I knew everyone was just going to be like, oh, so like when's the big day or what? And what you're like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not dating anyone, you know, or like they'll be like, oh, I have some boy. And I'm like, I don't really care about this right now. Like, I have to go run my company, you know, and I have all these amazing things. And I do hope, like, one of my biggest things that I do hope for like this next generation is like, we just change the rhetoric for like brown little girls, you know, to not feel like that is the end all be all in life, and that like success comes in many different shapes, you know. And like, yeah, of course, like I eventually got married in my 30s. I had a kid later in my 30s, and like it's fine, you know, but like I didn't need to be stressed about it the whole time. And I actually say this honestly in my book. My biggest regret was being stressed about it the whole time and feeling like I couldn't enjoy certain moments or feeling like I was incomplete when like things were going great for my company. I'd be closing like $100 million and feeling sad inside because I was single or something, because this is what society had done to my mind.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Because I think a lot of women and also men, really, you know, folks who are really invested in their professional life, oftentimes sacrifice their emotional life and their personal life. And I think that there's no really wrong way to live, but I think just being true to yourself, I think, is the key here, right? Rather than living a life based on someone else's projection or their desire of what they really want for you. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it really comes down to you looking inside, figuring out what your priorities are, and doing that. And I have a whole system at the end of my book, which I call the LifePass method, which has helped me sort of figure out what areas of my life do I focus on and put goals towards and move towards, versus feeling like I'm failing at everything, or, you know, or feeling like I'm not doing anything. And I feel like that is really what people need to do, is think about what your priorities are before the priorities of everyone else. And obviously they're people you love, like their priorities will be your priorities because you love them, right? But thinking about what you really want to get out of your life is really important.
Right, right, absolutely. So, Payal, you talk about in your book finding your gift and giving it away. And I'd love for you to share more about this, and also perhaps ways that others can find their gift.
So, you know, always felt really lucky that I found something I loved when I was young, right? And I talk a lot about dance in my life, and people are like, oh, yeah, like you must love performing and being on stage and blah, blah. And I realized for myself, like what happens to me when I dance is really about how, for me, it makes other people feel, right? So, like, especially Indian dance, there's a lot of like emotional sort of like expressions with it and a lot of storytelling. So you really evoke emotion in people when you're doing it. And I think that's like what really connected me to it. And it was at really a young age. I was only 5 years old when I feel like I had this performance where I felt this like deep connection to being able to impact others through dance. And so I realized, and as I've gone through life and I built Classpass and all of that, even saw, I have really thought about it and I've researched it too. It's like, it's so much about having a purpose in our lives, but our purpose is meant to be given and impacting other people. We are all put on earth to give to each other. And, you know, whatever our purpose in life is, like we need to think about what it is and how it is really servicing other people in our lives. And that's actually when we're going to be the most content. So that's what we really all have to think about. Now, for people who don't have it, and obviously not everyone will find it when they're 5 years old. And I honestly feel like part of why I created Classpass was because I knew that, you know, and I think one of the biggest things is go and try new things, right? It took me to go to San Francisco to even come up with the concept of potentially doing entrepreneurship, right? And I think people sometimes just need to get out of their comfort zones, whether that's new people, new environments, new sort of emotions and sort of fears that they're facing, will help them see new things for themselves. And then I think the other part of it is taking away the noise, because this is sometimes the hardest part about all of it, is that your purpose is already inside you. It is not something that someone's going to hand to you, right? Like you're already born with it. So it's actually about taking away all the distractions and allowing yourself to listen. And I even think for me, like there were so many times I was fighting it, and then the universe was just kind of guiding me, like little things like, you know, getting my dance company on the cover of like the art section of the New York Times. Like these were such huge moments for me where I felt like the world was telling me to bet on my own dreams and to go for what was in my heart. And I think the more we do what is in line with what is inside of us, like the universe will constantly, gradually keep moving us forward in that direction.
Yeah, that's powerful. So, Pyle, how much of your spiritual world is aligned with your business world? And are they separate or integrated? I'm curious, like, how you kind of think about your business from the lens of the spirit.
I mean, I think it's all connected, right? I think there is a way to look at business that's void of the spiritual side, and there's a way to look at spirituality that's void from the business side. And you can do both, but I think the magic happens when they're together, right? Like the artist in me created, and the spiritual person in me created Classpass, right? Is no matter how much business background I had and like great credentials I had, I know it was the artist and spiritual side of me that like birthed this idea, while it was everything else that probably helped it thrive. I can't disregard that, right? And I can't say that they both weren't intertwined. And when you're making decisions, going back to that why, like I think in business we talk about mission a lot, right? Like companies have a mission, and yeah, it's not just like a sentence on the wall. Like it has true meaning behind it, right? Like it is about a reason you are doing something, and that why is a very deep spiritual thing. And I think it was Simon Sinek who said it, like in a company, like a lot of people will be able to say what the what is, like the customers can also like describe you with the what. Few people will know the how, and a very limited people will really truly understand that why. And as a leader, like your job is to penetrate that why as much as you can through the veins of your company. And I think that is really like the most important thing, is that why is all about spirituality and connection.
Pyle, I'd love to actually ask you, what was the why for ClassPass?
So we have this beautiful vision statement, which is every life fully lived. Now that can mean a lot of things, but if you really think about it, it's about the hours of people's lives being filled with things that are soul nurturing, right? And I know people, it's like at the, like I said, you asked me at the top, like, what is ClassPass? I'm going to tell you the what. It's a fitness membership that lets people go to classes, right? But the why is about a fulfilled life, right? And we have tracked, like the number one metric, and I didn't realize this in the beginning, but the number one metric for us is reservations, because that is the hours of people's lives that we've been able to touch. And like the thing that makes me the most proud, like more than a valuation number or any like success or milestone we've reached, is we've helped facilitate over 100 million reservations. So that's over 100 million hours of people's lives that we've, helped to be more fulfilling. And to me, like that is a why and a true heartbeat for our company.
Wow. Yeah. And what do you think in terms of your perspective has changed since the pandemic? And how is that how are you looking at your business differently, or how are you looking at ClassPass in the future differently since the pandemic?
Yeah, well, last October we actually sold MindBody. So MindBody, or we sold ClassPass to MindBody. So we were actually acquired, and I've decided to move on actually from the business. But that doesn't mean I'm not like 100% connected to it, because it's like my why and my baby, which is so hard. But after a decade, I also knew that there was so much more for me to do. But the pandemic was a hard time. Like I think we were lucky that we had raised money right before it started, but it was hard to see, so many of our businesses really struggle, because like, right, they have fixed cost businesses with rent and all of that. And that was really the hardest part, is because, I think our customers like found other options, and we gave them other options. Like they were finding ways to keep moving at home. Even though like, we obviously know that like in-person classes have just like a different fuel to their fire. But I think it was really hard for the studios. And I think like on the other side of it, like what's hard is, even when I opened the Classpass app, like I know so many businesses that either had to shut down or close because they couldn't survive it, and I think back to like, 2014, like you were saying, and like this growth of boutique fitnesses that happened, and I just like really, on the other end of this. And I think this is a huge reason why Classpass and MindBody are now together, is we truly believe like together we're going to be able to fuel the industry even more and help it, get through this time, because we need to be on the other side of it. People want to work out and have these amazing wellness fitness experiences still.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also curious, like, what does that mean for you next? What do you think the future of business is, and where are you kind of putting your energy and time?
It's an ongoing topic. Like, I think it's really funny, like even having written this book during this time in a way and having it come out, like in a strange way, I almost feel like I'm back to my beginning of my book, if that makes sense. Like, where I'm like calling, like listening to the universe, trying new things, to see like where that deep why kind of resides for me. But I know myself well enough to be able to like do the things I love. So, I obviously am like dancing and spending time with that because it's always this deep cornerstone for me. I mean, I have my book coming out, which is like also kept me really busy, and I'm exploring new areas, like obviously I invest in mentor and advise startups a lot, especially female founded ones. And I'm really kind of interested in like crypto right now too. So I'm just spending my time learning again, being somebody who is, really like into my intellectual curiosities and learning about the world again. And I know, sometimes it takes a year to figure out a decade, and that's okay. Like this last decade of my life was wonderful, and I wouldn't have never thought like I could have planned it that way. So I don't want to sort of be like, just because I need to do something, get into something. And I sometimes find myself doing that because it's our natural tendency to like be like, yeah, I'm going to take on that. And then I'm like, wait, why am I doing this? So I'm really in a place where I'm like, nope, just let me listen to that why, because that why is going to get me to, do even more and impact more people's lives in the future.
That's so powerful. Yeah. I think we're a culture that likes to just do and take action. And then, years later, we're so far off our path because we haven't actually sat and like listened to what we really want. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's where my book starts, it's like literally me sitting there in a review with my boss being like, wait a second, do I want to be here? Or do I want to be dancing? And I think, we go through that and we never question it sometimes. And it's so important to question it, and it's okay to move forward. Right. And not get pushed into certain paths because that's like I said, the standard path that everyone else is doing.
Right. Right. And Pyle, I'd love to walk through, if there's time, the Life Pass method. If there's time, and if not, we can just move forward.
Yeah, I mean, it takes an hour and a half, so it's a pretty in-depth process, and it's totally detailed out in the book for people to read and do the entire exercise. You can do it right in the book. But what I can do is obviously explain it. It's 4 steps. The first 3 steps are really about narrowing in on where we're going to set the goals. And then the last step is actually setting the goals. Because I have realized in my life, it's not about writing the goals. Like we can all write goals down. It's about anchoring them in something that has depth and emotion is connected to you. So the whole first step of the process is about reflecting and figuring out like where you currently are. And, people end up picking a few words that sort of represent what their last year is. And then we go on to do the same thing with the coming year. So I ask you, if this was a year from now, and you were looking back, what words do you want to really emulate this year? Right. So what you're kind of doing is, instead of choosing like your accomplishments in a year, you're really anchoring yourself on like, what do I want to feel? Right. And what themes do I want this year to be about? Right. So I call these your dream words. Right. So these are sort of anchor words for your year that you're going to set goals against. And then before we once again set the goals, the next big part of the process, the third step, is all about focusing, right? Because like I said earlier, we cannot make progress in every single area of our lives. And my focusing I do on a quarterly basis. So I focus like in certain areas for 3 months, and then I choose new areas to focus on for the next 3 months. And that sort of helps me iterate and move. Like I kind of have always felt like a year is way too long. And obviously a week is way too short, right? Like something can happen. So I kind of live by this like quarterly goal setting method. And so in the third step of the focusing, we do a time diagnostic. We rate the different areas of your life, of where you're spending your time. And then we go and circle the 3 to 5 areas that you're going to spend time setting goals in. And once you have those, I call them your focus areas, we go through a whole process of setting goals. Now, that's another big part of it, is setting goals, like, can be done in the right or wrong way that's going to either help you either achieve them or not. And so I focus a lot on making sure that they're measurable goals, that they're sort of in line with the right steps in the process, right? So you could say, I want to run a marathon, but that might start with like this quarter, just like running a mile, maybe working your way up to 3 miles, right? And then actually even evaluating how you feel, right, at the end of it, where people don't know where to like sort of start in the process, and like the end goal just feels too big. So I go through a lot of that, even figuring out with like certain responsibilities you have, right? It might be like finances. Like, how do you set goals in areas that also like make you uncomfortable, or set goals where you might have to like delegate tasks, right? So I go through a huge part of that. And then I also talk obviously a lot about execution, because, I'm the kind of person, if I write down a goal, like I said, I'll get it done. And I want people to build confidence in their ability to execute. Because the more you build that confidence, like the more you're going to just set bigger and bigger goals in your life and keep, going for the stars.
I love that so much. So, and that's at the back of the book for people to kind of work through and do, like you said, an hour and a half. And you do this every quarter, is that what you said?
I do. Yeah. Quarterly. Yeah.
Quarterly. Wow. So, Payal, what sort of things have surprised you the most on this journey?
Wow. Hmm. You know, I would say the amount of support you have from, like, I don't know, like the mentors I've had in my life and advisors I've had in my life. I talk about the people in my life as like team life. And I think everyone should sort of build this team life. Like, I never thought about like how many people I would employ at some point in my life, right? Like, I was sort of always thinking about the mission. And I think seeing how much like people can really help you make something when you really care about it has just been this like really rewarding experience for me as a leader, to watch them grow and to watch them sort of like march with me towards this. It's sort of been the side benefit of this entire thing, that I don't think I started entrepreneurship for that. Like, some people are like, yeah, I want to be a CEO and manage a lot of people. Like, that was not what I wanted. But I think like those relationships I've made, like I said, whether it was like through with the investors and board members, and then people who worked with me, just have become like lifelong friendships, that are go beyond even just working, right? And I think that's been a true gift that I never thought I'd expect.
Yeah, beautiful. I've heard that from a lot of entrepreneurs. The mentorship that plays out is so important and kind of like underrated, I think, from a lot of people. So, thank you for that.
Yeah. We don't talk about it as much, right? It's because it's like everyone's like emphasizing valuations and other milestones. But like, it really has been an amazing gift, especially like, I think for me, like, there was a few women I remember hiring early on who, I've always felt like an underdog, just like I'm a 4'11" petite human being. And I remember just like hiring some people from people who emailed me on like the customer service Classpass email. And they have gone on to like launch entire continents for Classpass, and like, it's amazing, and it makes me so proud to know that like I had some hand in that, and like helped them in any way and believed in them. And like, I think I'm a pretty tough boss, but I'm tough because I make people like do what I think that is unexpected of themselves, because I see it in them. And I think the people who treated me that way versus sort of blocked me from flying were the best entrepreneur or best leaders I had too, and best bosses.
Love that so much. Yes, I agree. I think our mentors need a lot more appreciation in our life.
Yeah, 100%.
So, Pyle, what are some books that have inspired you on this path? I'm obviously your own book is something that I think a lot of people should go and read and check out. But I'm sure that there's been maybe some books that have perhaps stayed with you through your journey that could be inspirational for other people in the audience.
I feel like this is cliche, but obviously Steve Jobs and his the autobiography, or not, well, it's not an autobiography. I feel like someone else wrote it with him.
Walt.
Yeah, the Walter Isaacson, yeah, book. That's been, I don't know why, but like, I think just seeing somebody who is going to go through the world dancing to his own drumbeat, like, I think just stories of that, like, while that was entrepreneurship and I went through that, it was great. But I think just whenever I read about people who sort of like I said, dance to their own drumbeat, it just inspires me because, I just have so many layers to me too. And I just don't feel like I belong in any one box. And I think the more I read stories, of people like that, I just get more and more inspired to give and do more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Payal, what do you want to tell our listeners about their wellness, well-being? What's sort of like your main takeaway?
My main thing for people is if you don't know what, your deep why is, like spend some time really cultivating that and listening for that. If you do know what that is, and then you're not doing it because of some limit or constraint in your life, like put a plan together to get through that because really honestly, your greatest life is on the other side of that. And you are going to be so happy when you are doing what's fulfilling to you. So that is really should be your anchor.
Amen. Okay. Well, that's a great call to action. And are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you if they want to follow your work? Obviously, they can check out Classpass by downloading the app on the App Store. But are there any other resources where people can find you? And also your book, where is it available?
Yeah. So the book is lifepassbook.com. And then I am mostly on Instagram at Payal. So Payal. You can find me there and just thank you for all the support and, keep going for your dreams and don't let anything stand in your way.
Amazing. Amazing, Payal. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been deeply inspirational. And I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value from this conversation, also from reading your book. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. This was wonderful.